Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I have some really awesome news regarding my wife and her cancer situation. Wednesday was her last day of chemotherapy, which is so exciting. While the medicine has been working and her last scan showed no cancer detected, this whole process has been pretty brutal. I'll walk you through how it goes. Ange walks into the hospital feeling great, and then it's off to labs, so she gets those through a port so she doesn't have to have an IV in her arm every time. Then we go to 6 hours of chemo infusions, and then we head home with what looks like a VHS tape hooked up to her, giving her 30 more hours of medicine. And then it's back to the hospital 2 days later to get disconnected, and then 3 more hours of fluid infused in her, and that is her chemo experience. While this part totally sucks, it's the next 5 days that are really, really awful. Ange is nauseous, her hands and feet go numb, and she can't deal with anything cold, and she's generally miserable. And then slowly but surely she starts to feel better. And once she feels really good, we do it all over again. The good news is we're done with chemotherapy, and really, we have one very important scan left, and if that goes as planned, Ange has one major surgery, and hopefully this nightmare is behind us. But that's not all the nightmares for the Powell family. Another nightmare, which we're in the middle of, and it's not close to as bad as cancer, is our roofing project. This has been a $20,000 comedy of errors, and while I won't tell you not to go with roofing, I will tell you that my experience with roofing was absolutely terrible, and it's not over. Well, that's not totally true. The guy who did our estimate, he was rad, and when I let him know that my wife was going through chemotherapy and that the timing of our roof project would be really important to us, he assured me that they would make sure they worked around our busy schedule. This guy even went as far to tell me that he was a cancer survivor too, and that they would take care of us with this timing. Now, while this isn't fair, I almost doubt that dude at this point, because based on all the bad information I've received from roofing, I have no reason to trust what he was telling me. If he is a survivor, I'm sorry, man. But if you were lying to get the job, I hate you. Anyways, the first red flag was the material delivery. They pretty much dumped shit in my driveway like a 12-year-old would do. All the materials that they delivered were totally mangled. I called and sent pictures to and they were like, this is wrong. And I'm like, no shit. And they say we'll have it replaced when they start the job on Wednesday. Next, they were going to order a dumpster to fit into my driveway. And I let them know ahead of time that the driveway is a little bit narrow and most dumpsters would not fit. Well, she assured me that they measured it and it would fit. They must have measured wrong because guess what? The dumpster didn't fit in my driveway and they had to put it on my lawn and ruin some of my grass instead. So that was Tuesday. On Wednesday, they were supposed to start. No one calls or shows. I text them at 9, letting them know that the dog was at the kennel and we were ready for them to start the job. And guess what? They made a mistake. They were now going to start on Thursday. Sucks for us. This job was supposed to take 2 days to complete, but based on roofing ordering the wrong skylight 3 different times, this will now take 2 more weeks to complete. And that's not all that pisses me off. Here's what else they did. While we asked them to stay out of our neighbor's lawn, they and their supervisor walked all over my neighbor's perfect grass. They left nails, trash, and cigarette butts on his and my property. The workers themselves, they were led by an incompetent manager who, when I complained to him, he called his company and asked them to communicate to me that I should only communicate to him through them because I was hurting his feelings. I was nice to you on the job site, but honestly, you suck at your job. You're the supervisor that left his employees on the job site by themselves for over 2 hours while you were at Home Depot buying the shit that you forgot. And while you were out, your workers put a hole in my bathroom ceiling. I also didn't mention that the job was pushed back a day after you started because you had your compressor stolen from your vehicle at your house. So I was not impressed with at all. I had to have another set of contractors come over to come and fix the hole in the bathroom that those men put through, and they did an amazing job. So thanks to those contractors. And I can go on and on about how terrible my experience was. But like I said, I'm not going to tell you not to use them. But my experience was so unprofessional and frustrating, and I can't even tell you if the work was done right. I have to get someone on my roof to double check their work, as really, they're not a stand-up company in my personal opinion. But my guest this week, Jason Borgstede, is the most stand-up guy that you're going to find. For better or worse, Jason always tells it like it is, and that always makes for a great podcast. While I know Jason doesn't do roofs, I know he's one of those guys that if I hired him to do my roof, based on the way that he does things, he would make sure it's perfect, because that's the kind of stand-up guy he is. And on part 2 of our podcast, I think I bummed Jason out a little bit. I'm sorry, Borgie, that was not my intention, but I thank you for our conversation. I should also mention that one thing that was so important to Jason's development in snowboarding, as well as so many others, was High Cascade Snowboard Camp. And I can't tell you how stoked I am to have them supporting the podcast these days. If you haven't given your child the gift of summer snowboard camp, it's not too late, and High Cascade has been the most important camp in snowboarding for the past 30 years. You can find out all about the camp and what's available in their ad in the podcast. Please listen to it and send your child there. I have plenty of other sponsors that I also want you to support. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Rollerblade, Best Day Brewing, and Elan Skis. Now it's time for part 2 with Jason Borgstede. So when we last left off, you were talking about the King of the Hill event, and that was the biggest snowboard event early on in Valdez. And you had mentioned that there were some gnarly dudes involved, the farmers and the piratas, and there were some great stories from that. And I figure we might as well start out with one of those crazy stories from back then in Valdez.
So there were plenty of crazy stories of what I would call the adults, because like I said, at the time, I was 19 when I first started doing the event, and I was a child among men in more ways than one. I had no business being there that first year. Didn't really know how to ride big mountains, had done none of it, but I worked at the shop, and Scott said, yeah, of course you should do it. Go do it. So all right, I'll go do it. Quickly found myself a fish out of water. But the story for me that was interesting was that being of that age, they had bands there. And even though this was Valdez, which is a tiny, tiny town, they held to the rules. So if you weren't 21, you couldn't come in the bar and listen to the bands. So I had not much to do. A bunch of the younger Alaskan snowboarders like Jesse Burtner and Pete Iverson, the younger Liska boys, a lot of people came down to hang out and be around that for a few days, a little bit here, a little bit there. And one evening there was a dance at the local teen center. So all of us ranged in the neighborhood of, between 16 and 19. So we decided, we can't go to the band. Let's go to the teen center and see the dance, Back then we were into dancing and all this stuff. Pete Iverson was quite the rave master. Not like you might think now. It wasn't just about drugs. He was just super into dancing, all night, never stop dance type thing. So Pete, Jesse, myself, and I can't remember who else. There was about 5 of us, though, that went to this dance. And the local dudes, as it would be at most things, are on one side and the local girls are on the other side. Well, we start dancing, and that's an attractant to females at that point. Guys are willing to cut loose. So they start dancing with us, and dudes didn't like it. So we got some mean mugs. We didn't think too much of it. The events afterwards are a little hazy. And again, not because I drank or anything, but because it was nearly 30 years ago.
Right.
But long story short, we were in the mind that maybe we could meet with these girls later. We followed them to a house. We tried to go up to the door, and a minivan was parked in the driveway. It didn't go the way we had planned. So at some point, a minivan door slid open. A shotgun was racked. We jumped in our cars, peeled out of there, did not want to get shot. And so began a chase around town, a car chase. So we're in a Subaru Justy. Pete Iverson was driving. Pete was known as quite the driver at the time. So Pete's driving. We start a pursuit chase where people are coming after us. And I will tell you, this was not the only time in our history of Iverson, Burtner, myself, and a few others being chased in a car chase. But this was the time in Valdez that it happened. So the chase leads around a little bit around town. We head towards the dock area. Valdez, like I said, is small. You head towards the certain area, you're going to run into the water or the mountain. So we ran into what looks like a big circle, but it must have been an industrial area. There's no houses or anything like that. Luckily, Pete turns around. They think they've got us cornered. He dips just past them before they run into us, peels out, gets to the totem, and everybody jumps out. because the totem is where it's all going down. That's where the gnarly dudes are at. That's where the bands are at. That's where the snowboard community is at.
Okay, so you've reached your zone where your safe zone, you think.
We think. And just to emphasize this, and it's not a brag about different times or anything, but this was not the woke snowboard community that you might envision now in certain areas. This was the gnarliest dudes of snowboarding.
And outside of snowboarding, the gnarliest dudes, just period.
Yeah, they were there to rage. It was a different time. Things were rough, and that's how it went. Thus, us having a shotgun racked at us and a pursuit around town and all that. So anyway, I'm in the middle of the back seat of this tiny car. I'm not sure if you know what a Subaru Justy is, but yeah, it's slightly larger than a shoebox.
Yep.
And so we pull up, everybody jumps out, and for some reason, the two people on the sides of the back, it's only a two-door, jump out and close the doors behind them. So I'm like, I got to get out. But I realized those people are right on our tail and had just pulled up. So I just locked the doors and ducked down and lay in the back seat, hoping that maybe they won't notice. Well, they noticed. They walked up to the car, looked in the windows, and then started smacking on the windows like, come out, come out. And luckily, as I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen, Richie Fowler and a number of other heavies come out of the totem ready to defend the little guys at this point, and those guys scattered. They took off, and the day was saved, so to speak. You know, of all the young teen snowboarder kids, we're not going to get shot and brutalized there.
That's amazing. And just to think about that, with those hardcore legendary snowboard dudes who are really, really gnarly, were they intimidating towards you, or were they more like taking you under their wing and trying to make sure that you were part of what they've created?
Everybody was super cool. Nobody was big dogging us or anything. I mean, I was not a threat to anybody's snowboarding career, to the podium, to anything at that point. So I think they're just stoked that you come in, you show respect to them and what they're capable of doing. And in general, like I said, they all wanted to just have a good time. Just think about Farmer and Parada and Goodwill, Fowler, all these people back in the day. They were there to rip big mountains and party. They weren't there to like tough guy anybody or anything like that. But, you know, when they're raging, stuff happens. I think a certain owner of a snowboard shop spent a night in jail because he peed all over an ATM machine. There was just all kinds of fun stories that happened back then. You know, the down day activities were shooting guns on the side of the road. It wasn't a big problem back then.
That's some Alaska shit for sure.
It was super Alaska shit.
And so those dudes party really, really hard, and you're straight edge. And do you ever feel peer pressure from any of those dudes, or really anyone in snowboarding during your career?
I wouldn't say direct peer pressure from somebody going, but you knew that it was happening. And it was more in the normal snowboard world. Part of snowboarding is socializing and growing out and all that stuff. And we're in a different time where these different personalities are a little more accepted. I think my way of being would have been more accepted now.
Sure.
But back then, best I could do is go to the bar, have a Coke, and chat with people. But it just wasn't the same, and you could feel it with certain people. Volcom was one of my first sponsors ever. And you know, it was just always about the snowboarding for me. That was it, just snowboarding. And I don't mean that as in like, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to do this or be friends or any of that. I was super down and enamored with the whole world of it, but I wasn't down to party. I would rather just go home and get ready for the next day. Yeah, it's nerdy, whatever. I don't give a shit because all I cared about was, dude, I love this snowboarding and skateboarding stuff so much that it's all I can think about. I want to talk about it. I want to go watch it. I want to go read about it. I want to do it. I don't want to party. I just wasn't into that. But I don't want to like sacrifice and be like, oh, cool, I got up at 3 a.m. and then I tried to go do some stuff. So when I moved to Tahoe, I was on Volcom and I was getting packages and stuff like that. I guess you would call it flow probably.
Sure.
And then I started to get word. Perillo was the team manager at the time, or the guy that was dealing with me. And I got word like, hey, you were vibing these people at Boreal and stuff like this. And long story short, like, that's kind of a problem. We're going to just kind of like have to let you go. And I was like, vibing people? What do you mean? I never even talked to anybody. I had headphones in and they probably didn't know it because I've ridden with headphones since I had a brick of a cassette player in my pocket. My whole life of snowboarding, I've had headphones on. And I imagine this person didn't know it, tried to say hi, and I didn't hear it and blasted by. And that was the time when you got accused of vibing and all this stuff. And that's the way it went. And so, like, I got let go of that. And it was kind of heartbreaking because I felt like I was down for those guys and down for that cause and loved what they were about. I met all those dudes like at the earliest time when Woolcott and all these Troy Eckert and Ryan Emigart and all of them were at High Cascade in the very beginning of it all, before a Live We Ride. My first video shot ever, I believe, was in one shot in a Live We Ride, where I got to do this little volcano gap with Jamie Lynn and a few other dudes. And so, I was down, or like loved their energy. I loved everything about it. I just didn't party. And that was it. And I think that eventually led to that. I think in some of my Burton circles, I don't know if it was really held against me that much, but it definitely wasn't a positive in some people's perception of me.
Yeah, I mean, I can think if the team manager is a dude who likes to party and he's got a whole bunch of people on the team that are his kind of style of people, and then you don't party, it's not a chip in the win column for you, I guess, with the TM or something like that. But outside of the King of the Hill, in your Alaska days, you were making movies under the NSB name. Jesse Burtner was also doing his thing with his high school friends. And how do you first meet up with Jesse?
Well, Jesse and I came into contact, I believe, during USASA events, but we were, I think, 3 years apart in age. So I don't think we competed against each other. We were usually a group apart. But Scott Liska did a movie premiere in town one year, and my crew, NSB, and just to shout out to the South Lake Tahoe guys, that name, NSB.
New School Bitches, right?
That's right, New School Bitches. That came from a caption in a magazine where Nathan Yount is jibbing a fence, and it says, Yount jibs a fence while the guys from the chair yell, "What up, New School Bitches?" And thus was born. And funny side note, eventually the school district, in the time of the early 90s when gangs were a big problem, I had just graduated and I was starting a year of college here, and my friend who was a little bit younger was still in high school. They brought him into the principal's office one day and said, "Hey, we need you to tell us about this gang."
The NSB gang?
The NSB gang. And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "You're writing NSB on all your papers. You're doing these art projects with it. You're doing all this stuff says NSB. And we understand from the gang information," or whatever it is, that is the Naughty Samoan Boys gang. And we're just like, we're not Samoan. We're not that naughty. We are boys, but that's it. Like, we're snowboarding. You're not paying attention. Now, I get it. People don't always run with the same color that's affiliated with the gang, but we were small back then. I mean, I was gone, but my friend Chris Bombeck was pretty small little dude, did not resemble Samoan in the least, and engaged in no negative gang activity, but he was given essentially a school district cease and desist for NSB. So back to the story, we put together this little video. It was shit, to be honest. So it was some cool clips. It was a lot of jibbing, and this was like 93. A lot of jibbing. We did a ton of that around our town. We were early on in that movement of towing each other into rails, like bro tow, and hitting every rail we could find around town. But our video editing skills were garbage, and there was like weird gaps in it and all this stuff. But Scott let us play the video. Well, Burtner and his crew were also doing video production in high school. Burtner was on the Borderline team. I was on the Borderline team. And we both showed our movies. And then we decided, hey, we should think about this and see about doing something. And then a couple of years later, 97 was when we put out our first video, Polar Bears, Dog Sleds, and Igloos. Burtner and I started working together, and we basically just used it as a way to film all the local talent and put something together that represented us and our thing and how we wanted it to look. Basically a way for me to get all my Mongo footed skate footage into something. I have since overcame that disability with lots of help and practice and therapy. As I got a little bit more into skating and doing better stuff, I would do gaps and things where you had to be quick with your feet and push fast. And I was like, I can't do this, like repurposing my foot position every time I want to try to do something. I got to learn how to push this other way. And the result ultimately is that I have a super mean switch push.
When you're making these movies with Jesse, because, that's fast forward a little bit, are you living in Tahoe at that same time? And is it like you're doing stuff in the spring with Jesse and putting those movies together, but the whole first part of the season is focused on your personal snowboard career?
Yeah, by the time we started making movies, I was living in Tahoe every winter. I would come home in the summer usually. So it kind of had a different trajectory as those years really ramped up. 97 was the first year I did really well in a big contest. And then at the same time, 96, I had gotten some notice, and Mack Dawg in the spring at the US Open said, hey, when you get back to Tahoe, let's talk and let's do some filming. So I got to film a couple days with him and got some footage, or got one clip in the end of Meltdown Project, I believe it was, in the closing credits, because Rippy and I hit the same jump. He was super established. I wasn't. So I get a clip in the closing credits, and Rippy's stuff was awesome.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm excited to add High Cascade Snowboard Camp to the mix. If you really consider yourself a great parent, you'll give the gift of summer snowboarding to your kid. This is your excuse to get the kids out of your hair and onto the Timberline Glacier at Mount Hood. Instead of having to plan the day for your kids, they'll have a plan of hot lapping top-to-bottom chairlift rides on real snow. They'll be getting expert coaching and making memories that are going to last a lifetime. If you want your kid to love you, you'll send him or her to Arbor Snowboard's signature session. The dates are July 23rd to July 29th, and your kid will learn to shred from pros like Eric Leon, Mary Rand, Hayden Tyler, Steffi Luxton, Mike Lydell, and Estelle Pensaro. It really is a life-changing experience that your kid will thank you for forever. And if you don't want to hook your kid up, or you don't have a kid, don't forget about the adult camp. It's the perfect mix of expert coaching and adult activities. So treat yourself and come be a kid again this summer at High Cascade Snowboard Camp. You can find out all about the kids and adult camps over at highcascade.com. Next up, it's Best Day Brewing. If you haven't tried what critics and myself are calling the best NA beer on the planet, you are missing out. Look, I'm not going to quit drinking beer completely, and I'm not asking you to do that. But we all have times where we want an ice-cold beer, but we don't want something that's going to slow us down. You know, when you have to take your kid places, driving to the mountain, there's all kinds of reasons why you don't need to be slowed down in this life. And Best Day is crafted for us doers out there. The skiers, the snowboarders, the bikers, the skaters, the hikers, people like us. And they support cool things like this podcast, Michelle Parker, Darren Ralphs, and they are all over the pickleball scene. So if you play that, know that Best Day's supporting you. And while all that stuff is cool, I drink Best Day for the flavor. I've been loving their hazy IPA and their Kolsch lately. It tastes just as good as its alcoholic cousins without all the calories. I mean, these are both under 70 calories. One's like 53. So next time you're at the store, pick up the NA beer that supports our kind of people and will make you have your best day ever. I'm talking about Best Day Brewing. To find out more about the brand, the events, and the flavors, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com. My final sponsor this round is Elan Skis. And if you haven't had a chance to ski on one of the Ripsticks models, you're not skiing as well as you possibly can. I mean, there's a reason why Elan's been building a cult following over the past couple years in the States. And it's because their skis are lively, playful, fun, all while remaining stable at speed. Ask anyone you see skiing on an Elan, and they'll tell you right away, the skis are making them a better skier. And that's important. When you're buying a high-performance product, the hope is that it's going to make you perform better. And Elan does that every time. And Elan has some new models in the pipeline that are going to show a whole new generation how fun skiing can be when you're on an Elan. On top of that, they have a state-of-the-art factory that's powered by renewable energy provided by solar panels, and 70% of the materials they use to build their skis are sourced within 250 miles of their factory or less. To find out more about Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When you film with Mack Dawg a little bit, and this is a time where you don't see the movie until the movie comes out, most likely, because I don't think you're going and watching them edit. So when you see that movie come out, you film with them for a few days, you probably think you might have a couple clips, but you don't know, and you only have one in the credits. Does that bum you out at all? Or are you like, fuck, I'm in Mack Dawg?
Yes, the second one. So I had a clip in the Alive We Ride a few years before. I had started to get some small clips going in Tahoe. Back then, when you didn't have filming, you could rely on all these local contests. And then there was a lot of I don't know what you want to call, like maybe a feeder system, essentially, or a lot more open events that had pros, but people could try to qualify or get into it. So you could take this route of, I don't have anything to do right now. Well, I'm going to go do contests. I'm just going to learn tricks. I'm going to ride all the time, and I'm going to go do contests. And that's a route I took early on. And I would get with smaller filmers and smaller photographers and start to get some stuff stacking up until that 96 US Open when I met Mack Dawg. And then we started. And he had also sent me to see Kurt Heine. And that was when Mike first got his 3-chip Sony. I think it was the VX1000.
Yep.
And I was kind of at a level where he would go to Vegetate, the contest at Mount Hood, and film me there. Or maybe Heine would film me at summer camp a little bit. And that stuff was more on the digital stuff, so I could start to see it. But to your question, no, I was just completely thrilled. I knew I did some good tricks with Mike. And it's interesting because you immediately get thrown right into the big jumps, the big stuff. Mike was very much about progression and stepping up. And so my first time out, I'm with Rippy on this big hip type thing in the backcountry. And it was rad. Jim and I were both doing backside sevens. So, Jim's going to get the shot and I'm not going to get the shot. But I didn't have a huge bag to try, and I wanted to do something good that could impress him. So that's what I did, landed that. And then that made it in the credits. And I was like, yes. That also, I knew because of talking to Mike that he was stoked. So I knew that meant we're going to start working together more the next season. And then that's when things really started to kick off, 97-ish time. That leads into Burtner and I. So now I'm starting to film with Mack Dawg. I'm starting to do a pretty regular schedule of bigger contests. And when I can, I'm filming with my home camera. So I bought a tiny little Sony 3-chip mini DV recorder, and I would get friends or whatever to film in the pipe at Squaw or on a jump or something like that. And then I would just get a couple of those shots. If we met up as a crew, we would film each other a little in the winter. But then mainly it was like summertime, go back to Alaska. We started snowboard camp that same year. So we had summer camp to ride. We could film everybody there. And then we filmed skating. And we filmed a bunch of the skaters around. That's what it was. As we started to move forward and getting a little bit more stuff going between us, then I had more obligations to do. But then we also started saying, hey, why don't we go up in the spring and meet up in March in Alaska? So we would go back in March, film a bunch just hiking this place called Tin Can and build jumps up there. Then we would come back, finish our season off. I'd come back, go back to work at Borderline, do summer camp, and then we would film skating all summer. And we would do these marathon editing sessions in the fall, put the video out right before the season kicked off, and then continue on.
Rad. Well, I'm going to bring it back a little bit. I'm going to go to your second season in Tahoe, Nationals that year. But before Nationals, the US Open is happening. And you go to Stratton, and you're on the whole Burton program at this time. Are you included in all the Burton team dinners and events and stuff like that? Like, do you feel like you're a full-on part of the Burton team?
Not really. I don't think so. Not that I can remember. If we're talking about 95, I believe, is what you're referring to. No.
It's that first big air, because that year it sounds like you don't feel like you're part of it, but there's a big air going on there. And if you're a full-on part of the Burton team, they're going to have you on that list if you want to be in the big air. But you're not on that list. Can you tell us what you had to do to get into that big air that year?
Yeah, I would say at that point in time, I was essentially a glorified rep rider. My rep was the team manager.
Okay.
So yes, they were kind to me. They were nice and stuff, but I was not anywhere near the A team. I wasn't known. I wasn't near the D team really, but I was, starting to make some waves in the amateur world and stuff like that. So we come out, I'm trying to compete in half pipe, which I'm okay at that time compared to everybody else, but you could start to see them pulling away. And then I heard they're going to do a big air. What? Now this seems like this is up my alley. I'm a jumper. I mean, that's more my forte. So I say, well, how do we get into the event? And they said, well, we've got these people invited and we do have a few spaces for invite if somebody wants to petition in. And I inquire a little bit more and basically write us an essay that says why you should be in it. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen now. I mean, now you would have your manager or whoever, but this was the mid-90s.
Write an essay? Like, what, are you going to grade it based on my grammar?
I hope so, because I was decent in that. But what I did was I basically pleaded that, hey, I ride for Burton. I'm on the West Coast, so I'm not in their eyes all the time. This is what I love to do, and this is my chance to let Burton see what I can do for them and what I've got. So please give me a shot. I do not have that essay. I hope Todd Coleman or somebody out there at Burton has it somewhere, but I'm pretty sure it probably got thrown in the garbage. But they said yes. And the funny thing was, this big air was basically 2 5-foot tall mounds pushed within like 20 feet of each other. It was not a big air. There was not much big about it. It was like if you recall, border cross courses back then were pretty dangerous because they would make these crazy gaps where if you hit the uphill, you were going to get smoked.
Yep.
There was no safe landing. It was just an absence of jump in the middle. So that's what this was. It was total trash, but it was an attempt, and it was the beginnings that came to be something amazing. So we will give it the respect it's due. They just didn't know what they were doing back then. So they made these 2 piles. I can't remember exactly. I know Cale Stevens was there, and Michelle Taggart was there, and I know that Michelle may have gotten 2nd or 3rd place in it. And I don't recall who won, but I know I didn't place, but I landed something over it. So by just being there, being in it, and then following up, they essentially let me in the next year. Well, the next year went from this tiny little thing that you could build with a couple shovels in a parking lot to the full-blown 65-foot cheese wedge that as big air kickers in the late 90s. Huge jump that's, 10 feet tall and then spans 65-foot gap and then big, huge landing, stuff like that.
And the Open at that point at Stratton, I mean, that was the biggest event in snowboarding. Can you describe what that was like? I mean, especially when you have a huge jump. Was it just total pandemonium when they were watching you guys hit the big air?
The first year, there wasn't much happening. It was a sideshow, and it was laughing a lot at people crashing. The second year, when it got big, I don't remember too much other than the focus I had going like, oh, I'm going off this, and this is real. This is real and it's big. And I remember I did like a backside 540, some stuff like that. Nothing huge at that time. This was 96. And I'm riding with like a backwards baseball cap and a long sleeve shirt. No helmet. I don't think anybody had a helmet. And it was just wild. It was huge. It felt awesome. It was one of the earliest times I can remember like, oh, you're going really fast and you're going to go really big in the air. And this is a good feeling. It feels right. It feels a little bit scary, just enough to bring you right into that moment where you're super focused. But it felt good. It felt right. It felt like the place I was supposed to be. So I landed some stuff. I did not win. But that's when Mack Dawg was like, hey, you rode well. I don't know what he said. I probably made that up. He said something was appreciative of what I did on the jump and then said, hey, dude, let's meet up when you get back to Tahoe. And so by me doing well on that jump, that got me into filming with Mike. And that was one of the biggest things that ever happened to my career.
And when you think about your filming career, because we're not going to talk too much about videos by any means, but when you think about the part and the year that was really the most important, the one that had the most impact on you and the whole snowboard community? What was your favorite part that you put together over your career?
Probably the best one for me was Amp, because it was my full part in the video, and it had a lot of stuff. It had half pipe, jumps, rails, all of that stuff. I would say the one that people probably remember the most and had the biggest impact was Decade.
Yep. I mean, that was such a huge movie.
Yeah. Dude, I think about this all the time, and it sounds like such old guy shit, but we were really blessed to be a part of something amazing as it was becoming what it is, as it was developing and being created. Tricks were being created, not just adding a spin. Movie styles were being made, heroes were being made, the whole technology of it was being figured out. It was an incredible time, and Mike put me into some really iconic movies, and that's a legacy that I'll get to hold on to for the rest of my life.
Awesome, man. And then when I think about the next comp that I'm going to bring up, it's a summer one. In 97, the X Games heads to San Diego. And while I don't think there's been a Winter X yet, or I'm not even sure, but is it one of those huge scaffolding jumps in San Diego?
Yeah, so I won the big air in the US Open in 97.
Yes, which is huge.
They had one X Games that year in Snow Summit or Bear Mountain, one of those two. They had a big air there and a slope style, I believe, and border cross, but that was the first Winter X Games. That summer, they put a big scaffolding kicker with crushed ice in San Diego. And because I did well at the US Open, Don Bostic invited me to the Summer X Games. So I go up to this big scaffolding jump, I do a few tricks, but this is one of those weird moments that didn't go exactly perfect, but I couldn't have asked for better. So I do a backflip 180, I land backwards, I went halfway down the landing, and I'm hauling ass, and I get bucked a little as the snow flattens out, and I air out into a huge mud puddle and pond skim across this mud puddle. And so at that time, well, of course, that's going to be a highlight thing. So that got a lot of TV exposure on whatever the ESPN shows are where they do the highlights and stuff like that. So I do this trick, I pond skim across, I get third place. So Kevin Jones and Peter Line, I think Peter wins, Kevin gets second. That allows me to get invited to the Winter X Games. I get invited to the Winter X Games, and then I win that.
And that podium's pretty fucking crazy too.
That's the same two guys, I believe. So I spent a lot of time sharing podiums with those two guys.
And, one thing that I want to talk about with the Summer X Games is I don't see you as a guy who's going to get super excited to see everything that's going around an event like the hoopla at an X Games type event. But is the Summer X Games a chance for you to kind of see your skate heroes up close and personal? Like, are you watching all the skate events because you're totally passionate about that too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't care about bungee jumping or rock climbing. They had rock climbing on like a fake rock wall and weird stuff like that. They were really trying to figure themselves out back then.
Right.
And I didn't care about that. But yeah, I was at the vert ramp every day, checking that out. I was at whatever I could be there for skateboarding. I was there. And actually in one of my videos in 99, they moved that slushy jump to the San Francisco pier. And I got to skate that course, the street course. And I got to skate it with like some pros that were warming up.
Oh, sick.
Before they really started going. So I would get out of their way. But got a couple clips on that for our video. And it was pretty awesome to get to be there. It's pretty awesome to see how gnarly the stuff they were skating was. It's not all smooth and easy. It was aggressive and big, and they would just manhandle it. And I was just crawling in the corner. I was just barely trying to hold on and be around it, but it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that is pretty rad. And then when you start doing really well, you've won the X Games, you got third at the Summer X Games. Do people start coming to you and start wanting to sponsor you? Is it like, hey, this guy is on his way up and he's taking over in the sport and we want to sponsor him? Do you get more sponsors out of it?
A little bit. Back then, everybody was pretty much still head to toe Burton. So I got some good sponsorship with Arnett for goggles, and that was basically it. Later on down the road, I got some smaller sponsorships with ProTech and with Osiris and stuff like that. But mainly it was Burton and Arnett. And I won the US Open, and I think I may have won the X Games too, and was not getting paid yet from Burton. Was getting a travel budget and incentive and was not getting paid yet.
It's so crazy because when you think about who was in that X Games with you, I think of Terrier, Peter Line, Rippy, Daniel Frank, all of these legends, and you end up winning the X Games. And these are guys that in every magazine that you open up, they're going to have a full page spread, and that's going to be one ad for them, but they're going to have like 5 different ads because they're such big name pros with so many different sponsors. Does Burton or anybody else market you where they're putting your face in magazines to try to build you up and make you like a super pro?
Well, now you can see why I had the argument with Barry Dugan.
Yeah.
They gave me a couple small ads. I had I think one in Heckler. I had an inside cover.
Which is like the smallest magazine. It was awesome, but it was like the smallest magazine of that time.
Right. Most of my stuff was editorial.
So you're earning photos.
By no means was I a self-made snowboarder. You don't get anywhere in this business without having people lift you up. And that's why you want to always lift others up when you get a chance, you know? It's all built on the economy of helping each other out. But the people that were helping me out weren't really the people that were my main sponsor. You know, I had George Cavallo looking after me. He gave me one of the first checkouts that was 2 pages in Snowboarder Mag, him and Mark Sullivan and Pat Bridges. But Cavallo was the main guy, I think, that went to bat for me there. I would earn these photos by just going out and shooting and riding with people, but I wasn't getting ads out of them, which means the magazines were liking it, but the company wasn't saying, oh, okay, let's jump on this and really start promoting this guy.
So they're not using you as a sales driver, which has got to be frustrating because I know ultimately like the goal is to get a pro model. I mean, that's something you want to hang your hat on for the rest of your life. We talked about that a little bit in the last podcast. We'll talk about it a little bit more here, but I like to talk about money in a lot of my podcasts. You had mentioned that you made $36,000 from Burton, but with all sponsors and incentives during your best year in snowboarding, how much do you make? Are you able to make like $150K?
The most I ever remember the tax man saying that I made was about $117,000.
Okay, and that's a lot back then.
That is. Now that probably includes your travel budget.
Okay, so that's not a lot back then.
You know, I was committed to this, so I stayed at the cheapest place I could stay at. I ate cheap. I didn't waste any money because I had to spend my own money first, and then I had to get it reimbursed.
And just knowing that you came from nothing pretty much. So it creates more of an appreciation for every dollar that you earn compared to most snowboarders who usually have a really good life that they're coming up from. So I guess the money that you do earn, you're not going to blow on stupid shit, but do you buy like a house and a car and shit like that?
So I drove this Subaru Justy. I had my own Subaru Justy.
Okay, you liked it so much you bought your own?
Yeah, not the one that was in the chase. When I started to go to college, I had to drive from Eagle River to Anchorage. So that's a 20-mile drive or whatever. So my mom bought this used Subaru Justy, and that became my car. So when I moved down to Tahoe, I took that thing with me. And I drove this thing for years to the point where everybody was making fun of me, like, dude, you're winning this stuff. Why don't you get a real car and stuff? I'm like, I don't know, it works. The board fits in the back. It's got push button 4-wheel drive. I'm all good. I just wasn't that enamored with it. When I did finally decide, like, okay, stuck it out in this for 5 or 6 years, I'm going to move up. Then I bought a nice car. I bought a nice SUV. And then the next year, we were in Tahoe, and my friends Bombeck, John Cooley, a few of us were planning to get a house together in Tahoe. They were all going to move there. And I had just been accustomed to renting a house every year. Well, we couldn't find anything to rent. I went down a little before them. I couldn't find anything. This was back when you didn't just hop on the internet. You know, you had to go to an agent.
Get the local paper too.
Yeah, get the local paper, make some phone calls, all this stuff. So I did this feet on the ground type thing, and it didn't work. So I was living out of a Motel 6 basically in Reno, trying to find a place, or on the couch with other people until I could find a place. Couldn't find anything. And my mom was like, hey, you've got some money in the bank. Why don't we look at buying a house? So I thought, whoa, that's crazy. You don't do that. You know, I was 25, I think. And I thought, man, that's crazy. That's adult stuff. Anyway, so we start looking around. I find basically the cheapest house in Truckee and put the money down, get into this house. We all move into this house, and now I'm a homeowner. So yes, I put my money towards that stuff. My frivolous spending was like, maybe I would buy an extra couple CDs that I would justify, like, hey, maybe we'll use this in the video or something like that, or I'd buy skate decks or stuff. But I was pretty happy with my life and got most of what I needed taken care of from sponsors. So there wasn't a lot to spend money on. We did invest in computers and video cameras and stuff to continue to make JB Deuce videos. So we would put the money there, but yeah, I wasn't really blowing money.
It's time for my second sponsor break, and if you haven't shopped at Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, you aren't only letting me down, you are missing out on the best shopping experience online or in person. Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the deals, and the best products from the world of ski, snowboard, inline, wakeboarding, and so much more. What I love about Peter Glenn is that they price match. If you find a product at a reputable dealer for a lower price, Peter Glenn will match that price. They also offer free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and it's always easy to return something at Peter Glenn if you don't like it. That's important, because if you get something that doesn't fit, you don't want to hassle returning it. And some retailers make it a hassle, not Peter Glenn. So next time you're in the market for anything outdoor related, support the brand that makes this show happen and head on over to peterglenn.com. Next up, it's Rollerblade. Ski season is coming to a close, and if you're like me, your ski legs are really firing right now. If you're also like me, you sometimes slack in the summertime, and getting those ski legs back is so hard. I found a way to fix that problem. Inline skating. Not only is it fun, but it'll keep you in ski shape all year long, all while burning the same amount of calories that you would by running or biking. And if you're a runner, switch to inline. It's going to save your knees. And if you're a biker, save your bank account. Skates are a fraction of the cost of a bike, and they travel so much easier. And for everyone, Rollerblade has an award-winning skate-to-ski app that will get you in the best shape of your life for ski season. To find out more about the app and to find out more about all the amazing skates, head on over to rollerblade.com. My final sponsor is Stanley, the iconic Seattle brand that has been outfitting your adventures since 1913. For over 90 years, Stanley has been the right choice for the planet. And if you don't have a Stanley water bottle, it's time to rethink your drinking habits. I mean, it's 2023, and using single-use plastics are unacceptable these days. Good thing is, I'm going to make it easier than ever for you to get that water bottle, all of your camping and storage needs, and more. Yep, I'm going to save you 30% on all of your Stanley products. If I were you, I would pick up 6 of the pint glasses, which I use every single day, a water bottle, and a bunch of their food storage and camping stuff that you're going to need this summer. To get the deal, all you need to do is head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST. That's all lowercase and no spaces, and you're going to save 30% on your order. It's a sweet deal that I hope you take advantage of. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. You win a few big airs at Grand Prix, you win the Queenstown Festival Big Air, and you're putting out movie parts every year. But like 2000 rolls around, and we talked about this on the podcast last week, you were offered a Dave Downing deal with Burton, you wanted a pro model, and eventually you were left with nothing with Burton. And this happens to a guy who won the X Games, the US Open, put out parts with Mack Dawg. Could you have signed with other brands, or were you pretty much over it at that point?
Definitely not over it. And here's the funny part. The last year I was there, I got 2 first place and like 4 second places.
So you're on fire.
So I got second place at the Open. I got second place at the X Games, second place at the World Championships, a couple firsts in Grand Prix, stuff like that. And Barry comes to me and says, well, it's obvious that you're not really the best guy. You're like the second best guy.
What an asshole.
Yeah, you're just nagging you, you know? And I guess that's how old school negotiations went. But I was making fucking $3,000 a month, you know? When I first got a paycheck from Burton, it said on the paycheck, like in fine print, it said, if this check is over $25,000, then you must do this or this at the bank. And I went, what? People are getting checks that are more than $25,000 a month? And I'm like over here begging this guy to give me something that shows, like, I tried to ask for $50,000 a year in a thing. And that's basically where they, you know, I had a 3-year contract, 1 year and then 2 extension years. They did the 1 year, they extended 1 year. And then I was like, hey guys, can we renegotiate? Can I get some more money here? I'm doing all this stuff. And then they started asking me about these other questions. And then eventually they were like, no, we're not going to renew your contract. And I was like, what? You can't even handle $36,000 a year for what we're getting? And when you combine me not really wanting to go that direction, the argument with Barry, well, I did try to find an agent. I did try to have some people go out and try to hunt down some deals for me. I had some almost deals happen, but the agent kept coming back saying that the people at Burton said you were really difficult to work with. You know, that's hurtful to hear.
Yeah.
Because I felt like all I ever did was stand up for myself. I wasn't taking a lot of money. I wasn't late. I didn't miss events. I didn't sleep in. I wasn't hungover. I wasn't battling them, like going, hey, I'm going to go to this company and then they're going to give me a bunch of money and then I'm going to come back to you, which was happening with riders. There's all kinds of crazy stuff happening with people. And I thought, like, dude, all I'm asking for is my due, and for you to tell me, hey, what is it going to take to get what I'm looking for? That's all I'm asking for. And I was painted as a difficult person to work with. And if I was, then I feel fairly self-aware. And I feel like other than asking for that stuff and not wanting to go the route of what they were looking for as far as not pro models and stuff, that's where you could consider it difficult. But guys, just have a conversation with me and break it down for me. Then we can decide if I'm going to be difficult. But when you play this vague cat and mouse game with a rider, then what are they going to do? 25, I'm doing everything you're asking me to do. And then you're telling me like, hey, we want you to not go the route that looks natural. So what do you think? You're like, what do you mean? What do I think? Of course, I think I should keep going this way. And I didn't know my career was in jeopardy by saying that.
Yeah, you're just standing up for yourself and doing what you believe is right without being an asshole, but you end up losing pretty much the Burton sponsorship because of that. And in reality, I don't know if it was that year, but it was kind of right around there when Brushie left for Ride for like $1 million. Were you shitting your pants when you heard a snowboarder was leaving Burton for $1 million?
No, I mean, Brushie, we kind of thought was in a different realm. I think that happened before I left, but I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know. There were probably different riders that I was envious of or jealous of or whatever. I didn't ever really feel that towards him. I mean, he's an iconic legend.
Well, I was just saying that dollar amount, like it was just a crazy number for someone to get paid.
Like I said, I knew that thing that is said on the check was basically steered towards Terrier and Rippy and those guys. And I was like, hey, I'm doing this stuff too. Can I get a piece? And that didn't work. And so I was more just like upset with the guy who made the decision. It was Barry and it was somebody else too. And I eventually had a friend who worked there. I won't name him because he's a great guy. He's now a very successful marketing person. And he told me later on, he's like, hey, what happened was these guys felt like they missed the ball on your arc.
On marketing you and building a brand out of you?
Right. And so then they thought, okay, well, what do we do now? I guess we, missed whatever you want to call it, missed the train. So we got to figure out what to do with this kid. And when I didn't want to go in a lower, less known route, then they decided, well, let's get rid of him then. Ironically, the person who made that decision a year later was no longer team manager and was working registration at the US Open. And then a year after that, they were gone. And it just made me think, like, everybody's got their path and their crosses to bear. So I'm not trying to shit on them for that career trajectory. What it hurts, though, is that the snowboarders are the ones that are putting their life on the line, who are foregoing a normal life of security, of financial things, of relationships with family and friends and all of this stuff to pour everything they have into building a company up. And somebody with a marketing degree can make a decision that affects or kills your entire career, and then they're out on their ass a year later. And there's nobody coming back going, oops, hey, let's give you another shot.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, so it's very difficult It feels really out of your control. You feel helpless. And then you just watch it kind of fall apart there. And you got to live the dream for a while. There's nothing better in this world than to find what you love and somebody to say, hey, that's what you get to do every day. And then they take that from you just as fast as it's given to you. And you don't know what to do. It's a really difficult thing to handle emotionally.
I can imagine. And while you're still making movies with Burtner at this point, what you end up doing, I believe, is becoming part of a reality TV show. And that doesn't seem like your style at all. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, it wasn't my style. As I was barely clinging on to snowboarding with the edge of my nails on the cliff, then former girlfriend had introduced me to a modeling agent up here in Alaska, and I had gotten to do some work for like some foreign clothing companies and stuff. And for anybody listening at home, I am not exceedingly handsome or anything like that. I am not model material. I just happen to have a athletic look and be decent looking at that time. So I get that job, and then I come back one summer, and that same lady says, hey, they're doing a reality show. Now, this is super early on. This is 2001.
Like the real world's out and that's about it?
Yeah, like not much. So this show debuted in the time slot the same day, and the time slot right after American Idol.
Whoa.
So American Idol's been around 22 years. They both debuted the same night, right? One right after the other. This was so far back that there was no real prize or money or anything like that. I even had a girlfriend at the time. And so the premise is, hey, you go on this reality show. There's not a lot of women in Alaska. There's tons of men. So we're going to bring these lower 48 women up, and they're going to get to choose among these rugged Alaska men. So I was like, well, I kind of have a girlfriend, all this. And then the girlfriend was like, it's your space to ruin the relationship or not. If you want to go on this and get some exposure and try to get into some acting or some, hosting or whatever that could lead to, then cool. And to pull the curtain back a little, pretty much everyone on there was there to try to get, I shouldn't say that. A lot of the girls were there to try to get some connection to Hollywood.
Sure.
And I personally was there just for that reason. And yeah, went on the show. It was pretty fun. It wasn't salacious. It wasn't crazy or anything like that. There was no I wasn't banging it out. Some people might have been, but I was not. I got along really well with the girl. Her and I dated on the show, and she was a really awesome person. And most of the girls were, most of the dudes were. I still keep in touch with some of the guys. It was pretty fun. Basically, you would come on the show, the girl would come on, pick a guy, go on a date, hang out, and then they'd bring in a new crop of guys. And she'd pick a guy, go on a date, and then figure out which one she wanted to keep out of those two. And then the person she chose to keep out of the two would stay and become the new person. And then the next crop of guys would come in. So I came in around the second crop of guys, and the girl kept me the entire time. The show culminates in a float plane landing on a beach, and the girl is there in a wedding dress. And either there's somebody in the plane or there's not somebody in the plane. Pretty harsh. And I told her right off the bat, I was like, I'm not going to be on that plane. So don't get too upset or, don't feel slighted. But my situation. We're not here to find love. We're here to see if we can get something going in Hollywood. And cool, we're friends. So yeah, the plane showed up. I was not on it. And dude, what a brutal thing for the TV, for these girls, especially because there were a couple of them that were pretty psyched. All right, let's do this.
Having their dreams crushed on national television?
Yeah, that's a rough one.
So you do the reality TV thing, and what you have in snowboarding that's left other than the love and passion is your annual JB Deuce project. And I read your blog, and it sounds like you were blindsided at the premiere of Season for No Reason when Burtner informed you that he was going to do his own thing. What was that conversation like?
I think it was slightly after that, but it was at the premiere. I said, hey, let's start talking about what we're going to do next year. We weren't super far planned ahead, like when you talk to the Hatchets or Mack Dawg or someone like that who probably had a whole marketing plan planned out by then and all that. So the movie gets over and we're like, all right, let's figure out what we're going to do next year. And he's like, yeah, And I can't totally remember, but I'm pretty sure it was after that. I was like, okay, so what's going on? And then I believe I got an email saying, hey, I'm going to do my own thing. And the reason that felt like a big, tough blindside was our premiere is in September or October, maybe.
Right.
So it's pretty late. And at that point, you're like just about ready to start rolling into the fall and making sure sponsors are covered and all that. And I get told at that point, hey, I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm out. But first of all, we had made movies for 7 years together. I considered him a really good friend, all of that. And, just like a lot of relationships, it drifted apart when you don't notice it drifting apart. And then somebody finally says, that's it. The other person's like, I didn't see that coming. I mean, in hindsight, you could. There were things that happened during the summer camp filming at Steezen for skits and whatnot that you could see. But Jesse was definitely, you could see early on that Jesse and I's vision of what was funny, what was artistic, etc., was different.
Like the common denominator for you guys was snowboarding and just passion, right?
Yeah. And I considered that a plus because it kept the movie from looking too much the same, too monotone. And eventually, he gravitated. I can't, look, so I'm speaking for him here. So that's not necessarily the right thing to do. I'm making assumptions here. So just take anything I say with a grain of salt until you talk to him and ask him the same question. But from my viewpoint, what I saw was him gravitate towards another artistic person in Sean Genovese, and they really grouped together. And then that left me a little bit on the outskirts, and that's when the split really happened. And I'm not saying Sean jumped in and did anything. I'm just saying, like, you had a group there, and his mind melded better with a different person than with me, and that made an opening. And to be fair to him, and why he was so successful as he moved on, was that I was bound and determined to hold on to skating and snowboarding. And I was bound and determined to hold on to mainly focusing on Alaskan people, like a shop video from Alaska. And Jesse took that and made it more just a snowboard focused movie. His movies were a snowboard focused movie, and then really started to, even though they continued to feature some Alaskans, they moved into a broader overall movie vibe rather than mine was kind of local.
Totally. And then you guys have such a shared history and you guys did so much together, and it sucks when there's a breakup like that. Is there ever a moment when you two kiss and make up, and are you guys friends today?
Yeah, we're friends today. It took 20 years of, you're cordial and stuff, but I mean, to be fair, I was the one that was broken up with. So I don't know how he felt about it. We haven't really cut it up and done that. I think that there is a plan for us to do a little bit of that with Cody Liska in a piece later on down the road. But we just kind of let the wounds heal over, and we're friendly. At this point, what does it do for me to whine and complain about it or anything like that? I mean, he's a grown man. He had to make his path in life, and it hurt me deeply. But you can't live your life based on the potential that you might hurt somebody along the way. He had to go do his thing. And I'm a pretty emotional guy. I'm a wear your heart on your sleeve kind of guy. And a lot of these things that you and I have talked about have been really hurtful to me. The Burton thing was very hurtful. Eventually, I had an issue where Mack Dawg stuff fell apart, not with Mike, but with Ross, one of the filmers, and me not being on Burton or anybody's sponsor anymore. So it was inevitably going to come to an end. And that was a painful thing. This JB Deuce breakup was one of the toughest, because no matter what I did outside, I was very proud to come home and represent Alaska and be the vehicle that helped push these guys out to the mainstream. Because at that time, I had the name of the group. And so I had the ins and the ability to take these videos and say, hey, check out John Cooley. check out Chris Bombeck, check out Mark Thompson, check out whoever. And to be fair, let's just reel this back a second. Burtner ultimately helped make Mark Thompson and Gus big names in snowboarding. But that's what I was trying to do. What I wanted to do with these videos was help get these people out in front of stuff. I wanted it to be a vehicle to get them seen and noticed. And that was really a big goal. And so when it ended, it hurt. And I can see ultimately later on that Burtner did a fantastic job of picking that up and helping them out, and even helping skaters like Micah Hollinger get promoted through High Cascade and things like that. So he did a fabulous job with that. But I felt like, this is our mission, is to use our platforms to big up all of our people, to raise our crew up and let them be seen. And, I would take the video when I would do a shop tour, hey, Burton shot guys coming through to do a shop tour. I would take the video, whatever video we made that year, and I would basically force feed every shop to watch the video. And I'd tell them the whole time, oh, this is Micah. Oh, this is so-and-so. This is Adrian Williams. And this is this guy. And try to promote them. It was like futile in how small it was, what I was doing. But in my heart, all I knew how to do was anytime I could get in front of something was to try to push them and help it out. And so when that came to an end, it really felt like I no longer was able to do that. That was painful.
Yeah, well, I will say that you both have made such an impact on snowboarding and the culture around it for the past 20 years, which is incredible. But that ends. Then you have your poker career, which we talked about in the last podcast. You play for about 7 years. And then it's like, while that's happening, Borderline closes down. And that's a sad thing, because that is the hub of all the culture of everything that you guys have tried to build in Alaska. But just like you have many times in the past in your career, you go all in on your passion and you create the next rendition of Borderline in blue and gold, your skate and snowboard shop. And you say you wear your heart on your sleeve, but you actually prove that with how you kind of open your shop, because it's like you have to sell your house, you use all the money that you have to start blue and gold. And while I think that's got to be scary as shit, is it kind of like your mentality with everything where it's like, I'm going to put everything into this, but there's no way I'm going to fail? Failure is not an option?
Yeah, I mean, the older I get and the more into things I get, the less I am convinced that failure is not an option. It's definitely the mantra and the way I'm approaching things. But yeah, I mean, I'm not convinced any given day that I'm not going to fail, to be honest with you. It's the scariest thing that I've ever done, because I'm at my age. I have a family that's dependent on me, and I don't know what I'm going to do afterwards. So I am scared to death every day that this business will fail. And that's why I try to put a ton into it, because A, it provides for my family. B, it provides for my community. And probably most selfishly, it provides me the ability to stay wrapped up in this lifestyle that I love so much. And if I fail at that, then I'm going to lose all those things in one swoop.
Well, it's amazing that you've put it all on the line for snowboarding and for building culture in Alaska, because really that's kind of where you started in the, when you started snowboarding and hooked up with Jesse. It was like you guys were going to build community and build heroes in Alaska, and you're able to do that all over again. But with the knowledge that you've gotten throughout your whole career, being a rider, filming, everything that you've done, so you get to see that. But now I would think the only threats in your world are like the Amazons of the world, and then all these million goggle companies and direct-to-consumer clothing companies. Are those the things that are threats to a business like yours?
Yeah, I think the internet is probably the biggest threat. People just not understanding what shopping local really does. I didn't even notice this or understand this until I opened the store and the neighbor next to me kind of explained it to me. It's like, when you give $1 to my store, I'm going to use it to buy, not only pay employees, I'm going to pay local utilities, I'm going to pay local advertising, I'm going to pay a tax person locally, I'm going to buy a car locally, I'm going to buy my groceries locally, I'm going to do all these things to spend this money in my community. And that's going to go right back to the people who spend it in my store. Whether you're working at one of those stores, whether your family's working there, somehow, some way, it goes in full circle and stays wrapped up in this community. So I'm not sure if I answered your question very well there.
I think you did. So it's amazing that you still have the ability to really impact the youth of Alaska, but it's also so rewarding to you. And at this point in the show, it's time for inappropriate questions. Like I said last time, I had reached out to a bunch of people. Everybody's in remote areas. I wasn't able to get a ton of questions from people, although I did get questions for last week. And I got one question for this week, and then I made up two of my own. The one question that I have is a leftover one from Mike Arzt that I have. Mike is a guy that you go way back with. He's an amazing dude. I gave him an intro last week. I'm just going to jump into his question here. Mike says, you own 2 shred shops in Alaska. Any customer types that you'd like to tell to piss off? And is the customer always right?
Business is different now. Sometimes I wish that business was a little bit more like the old Liska days, but it is not. And ultimately, we learn to be better people through that situation. But yeah, I mean, I have people all the time just coming at me hard. The other day, somebody bought something and it stopped working, and I was accused of fraudulent sales because it stopped working. And I was like, how could you sell something that doesn't work? And I'm like, well, it did work. Now there's a warranty process. Let me help you with that. Long story short, we eventually worked it out and everybody was cordial. The people that can piss off really are, dude, let me tell you something. This probably get me in the most trouble in this town. It's a very conservative town. We have immune compromised employees, so we took the mask thing pretty serious. We're doing our best. That's when we came across the craziest people. We had a lady in her 50s, 60s come in just yelling at us that we were the devil and basically that she should have to put a scarlet letter on and all this stuff, and just screaming at us and not taking 2 seconds to say like, hey, why do you guys ask for masks? And we would tell them, and maybe they would have some understanding or some compassion. We had a guy come in and didn't want to wear his mask, said he didn't have to, and then started filming us and trying to pull the Karen crap where he was calling us racists and stuff like that, saying this is how Hitler did it and this is how it all starts, and, just going crazy. And then threatening me that he was going to sue me if I didn't pay him and apologize publicly and all these things. And it never happened because he knew he was wrong. He posted some of the video up and got no response from the whole mob of people that were anti-maskers. They were just like, doesn't really look like they did anything there, dude. All they did was ask you to leave because you didn't want to put a mask on and you were creating a disturbance. So we have some real dickheads that do that, and thieves. Thieves can get fucked. But almost everybody, 99% of the people that come in our store are awesome. They just want to be stoked on snowboarding and skateboarding, and that's just what I want to share with them. So most everybody's cool. Couple people can kick rocks, and overall, yeah, it's been a fabulous experience. I will tell you something, though, Mike, that especially being an emotional person or whatever, and this is the same exact thing in poker. The good you feel from something positive happening is never as high as the low is from the bad of something happening. So, we have a day where we put on an event and 30 people are there with their family members and they're telling us like, oh, this is awesome. Thank you for doing this. This is great community stuff. Everybody's smiling and enjoying each other's company and all that. The next day I come home to all this stuff about being a fraud. And dude, that just guts me, because to tell me that I don't care about the community or something like that, everything I have, I've put into this, and it just fucking tears your guts out when somebody talks to you like that, when it's not correct, but that doesn't matter. It still hurts, and it hurts way more than 30 people saying good stuff feels good. Because when you feel the good stuff, you just think that's just what we should be doing. That's just normal.
I agree, man. I get one email that says I'm a douchebag compared to 50 that say they love the podcast, and I'm focused on that douchebag thing. But you know what? I am a douchebag part of the time, so what can I say? But I'm going to go into question number 2 here. This is one that I made up. You're straight edge, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of talented people party their faces off. Whose career was most negatively impacted by their partying?
I mean, unfortunately, we've lost some amazing snowboarders, some amazing humans to that. And I think that that's the biggest tragedy of all, is that some really incredible people were taken before their time. I mean, they should be old and gray and worried about being in the old guys group of bank slalom or something instead of losing these people, you know? And I think that's the worst that it can be. I don't know. I think those early guys, as far as like party your face off and kind of blow some opportunities, that was probably more your early roughneck snowboarders, like the generation before me a little bit.
The dudes that heliboarded in jeans and shit.
Yeah, the gnarly guys, and some of them kept it together for a while, but the bodies just weren't going to hold up on that shitty equipment, going huge, rock starring it every night, slapping high fives and trading ends like Prada and Farmer.
Yeah.
That lifestyle is just rough, dude. And I think it burnt some of those guys out and their bodies don't work and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a good name for you other than, dude, rest the souls of those we've lost because of it.
That's a good answer right there. Now, my final inappropriate question, it's a perfect Powell movement inappropriate question. How many times did you shit yourself on a snowboard, and describe the funniest of them?
Yeah, I believe I've shit myself 3 times snowboarding. And we'll walk right through it. So 2 times were on border crosses, and the 3rd time was on a handrail, and all 3 in the realm of being a professional snowboarder. So there was a CBS event on the East Coast where you had to do border cross, half pipe, and slopestyle all in one day. And I'm border cross practicing, and I fly way past the landing and I splat. And I don't really notice what's happening there, but I go back to the room to take a rest between practice and when the event starts that evening. I'm like, man, I sure am sweaty. What's going on here? Man, I'm going to check out what's going on here. I'm awfully sweaty. And so I pull down and realize, like, oh yeah, I shat myself. Like, just a pretty fun time and pretty humbling. Like, I still got to do the event. I don't have any spare stuff. So I have to put my long underwear in the shower with me and soap and wash it, and then try to like get back to normal before the event.
Oh.
Second time is MTV event in Southern California, Snow Summit. Again, border cross. There's a hip thing. I'm watching people go. I see a girl go from a certain point, and I start a little lower going, no, if she's smaller than I am, so I should be fine or whatever. I'll start a little lower, completely soar past the landing. So I'm like 15 feet in the air over pretty much flat, hard morning ice.
Just the oh shit moment.
Yeah, literally. And I land, and this time I completely know that I shit myself, and it was not just a shat, it was a shit. But I also thought I blew my knee out. So I was more scared of that. I wiggle my way down to the bathroom down there, go into a stall, take my underwear off, throw them away, clean myself up, and then try to walk my knee off. I go back out, and I think I got 3rd in the triple air, but I didn't do the border cross. And that's when Kevin Jones was like, what are you doing, dude? You're not going to make your place in this world in border cross. Stop doing border cross. Yeah. And I stopped doing border cross after that. And time number 3, we went to Portola. This was when I didn't really have a sponsor, but I was filming for JB Deuce. And this day is immortalized in a heckler interview that I had later on in the early 2000s. And there's a double kinked rail in the back of this school that's pretty good size, and there's not much snow around. So you would usually truck snow in. I think there was enough in the side realms to get it. You bring a drop in your truck, you put it up there, you do this double kink rail. So one of the first times I'm like, let me shoot a ProTech picture. So I do the rail with a ProTech. And then the next time I jump up without the helmet on, and I slip out of the 50-50 and I hang my guts over the middle flat section.
Yep.
And immediately again, I know, like, well, more came out of me than my breath at this point. So I do what any consummate professional would do. I walk over into the bushes. I take my underwear off. I take some snow and I clean myself off. I put my stuff back on and I get back up on the drop-in ramp, and we proceed to get some clips.
That is amazing. That is how the Powell movement should end every week, with a nice shitty story like that. So that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's the podcast. And to tell you the truth, I love interviewing people like you just because you're few and far between. I mean, you tell it how it is, there's no filter, and that makes a great podcast. But for your career, obviously that wasn't the best thing, you wearing your heart on your sleeve. I mean, sure, you can sleep easier at night knowing that you sold out for no one and you kept it real at all costs. But the costs ended up being your Burton sponsorship, and I guess shit happens. But another great thing about you is that nothing's going to stop you. And that mentality that you'll end up on top and there's no other option is why you've been successful all of your life. And I wish that's a quality that more people had. So thank you for keeping it real, and thank you for your time on the podcast, both part 1 and part 2.
Appreciate you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So that was part 2 with Jason Borgstede. And while he had an incredible career, I feel like Burton totally screwed him over. Sure, he could have stayed on their program, but they mismanaged his career and then said fuck him. And I get it. Jason's personality is so real, and some people don't know how to deal with that. He's not a bubbling piece of wholesome marketability, but he was a huge talent. And when good marketers have supreme talent, they can sell it, regardless of personality. It's a shame Burton couldn't do that with Jason. But at the end of the day, Jason is still heavily involved in the sport, and most of those Burton heads are long gone. Really, there aren't many people with the passion of Jason Borgstede. And if you're ever in Alaska, make sure you head over to Blue and Gold to say hello. That's the podcast. At this point, it's time for the review of the week. And while I don't have branded Powell merchandise to give out for this week's review of the week, I am going to send a box of condoms to this week's reviewer. And I think you'll know why when I get to her review. This is a 1-star review, and it's titled Almost a Listener from Nobis, and it's by Ellie Ramon. Was going to be a regular podcast listener and even purchase some Stanley products based on your Nobis interview. But then you had to go off against pro-lifers. I don't believe in the cancel movement, but I can follow your advice and spend some more time in church and not listening to you. Well, thank you, Ellie, very much for that review. I had asked you in the podcast with Jeremy Nobis that if you were one of those people that wanted to tell women what to do with their bodies, well, don't listen to my show because I don't want you listening. And you are one of those people. So unfortunately, your parents didn't have the gift that I'm going to give you, but I'm going to send you a box of condoms for that comment that you sent. So you are the big winner this week. And all you need to do is email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com, and you can bring those condoms to church and distribute them to whoever you want. I don't really care. All I care is that you never listen to this podcast again. I'm going to assume that if you're a pro-lifer and that you're going to go to church and spend less time listening to me, then you probably also hate gay people. And that is not what I want out of a listener either. So if you're here to tell people what to do with their bodies, or you don't like people for their sexual orientation, there are plenty of other podcasts for you to listen to. What are they? I don't know because I don't listen to them, but I don't want you listening to this one. So I'd appreciate it if you're a bad person like that, in my opinion, to not listen to me. So please email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will make sure that you get your 3-pack of condoms. Please review the show wherever you listen to it. If I do read your review on the podcast, I will send you something. I'm not sure what that is yet, but you will receive something for your troubles. That's the show. At this point, I want to thank you for listening and ask you to support the amazing brands that support this podcast. They are High Cascade Snowboard Camp, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Rollerblade, Best Day Brewing, and Elan Skis. Have a great week, everyone.